It is early morning on a windswept RAF airfield in the summer of 1940. The distant hum of engines fills the air, cutting through the cool mist that lingers over the grass. A solitary mechanic, his hands stained with grease, crouches beside a Spitfire. The sharp scent of oil and metal mingles with the fresh, crisp air as he tightens a small, seemingly insignificant metal washer beneath the engine's wing. It is a routine task, almost laughable in its simplicity. Yet, this unassuming piece of metal will go unnoticed by the world, until the moment it tips the balance of an entire aerial war. Above, the sound of fighter planes roaring into life grows louder, as pilots prepare for another day against the relentless Luftwaffe. The stakes are high. In the skies over Britain, the survival of the nation hangs on a razor's edge. The mechanic doesn't know it yet, but this small innovation will play a pivotal role in saving thousands of lives and changing the course of history. The year is 1940. Europe is engulfed in the flames of war, and Britain stands at the precipice of destruction. The Luftwaffe, the German Air Force, has grown stronger with each passing month, dominating the skies over France, the Low Countries, and now, the British Isles. The Battle of Britain, the first major military campaign fought entirely in the air, is on the horizon. In the summer of 1940, the British Royal Air Force (RAF) is vastly outnumbered. With fewer than 650 frontline fighters, it faces a formidable foe in the Luftwaffe, which has nearly 2,000 bombers and fighters at its disposal. The Germans have an advantage in terms of numbers, and the RAF's main hope lies in its ability to intercept and engage the enemy before they can reach British shores. At the heart of the RAF's defense is its most prized possession, the Supermarine Spitfire. A revolutionary aircraft, sleek and agile, designed to excel in high-speed dogfights. The Spitfire, with its elliptical wings and Rolls-Royce Merlin engine, is the jewel of the RAF's fighter command. But the Spitfire is not invincible. Even this powerful machine is not without its flaws. It is difficult to maintain, and its mechanics are pushed to the limit. Small adjustments are made regularly to improve its performance, and in these moments, the seemingly minor innovations can have the most profound consequences. Meanwhile, the Luftwaffe under Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring is relentless in its pursuit of air superiority. With a brutal, strategic focus on attacking RAF airfields, radar stations, and cities, the Germans believe that by breaking the spirit of the British people and crippling the RAF, they can pave the way for an eventual invasion of Britain. Yet, despite their overwhelming numbers, the Luftwaffe pilots are often overconfident and underestimate the fighting spirit of the RAF pilots, men who are flying to protect not only their homes, but the very survival of their nation. The tension in the air is palpable. Each day, more Spitfires take to the skies, a desperate race to hold back the German juggernaut. Yet, even with the unmatched skill of RAF pilots, their chances of survival are slim unless every advantage can be seized, no matter how small. The Spitfire is a marvel of engineering, a symbol of Britain's defiance against tyranny. Designed by R.J. Mitchell and his team at Supermarine in the late 1930s, the Spitfire was built with one purpose: to outfly, outmaneuver, and outfight the enemy in the skies. Every line of its graceful airframe was designed to cut through the air with minimal drag. Its elliptical wings, a design inspired by the graceful shape of a bird in flight, give the aircraft unmatched agility. Yet, for all its beauty, the Spitfire was far from perfect. The aircraft was prone to mechanical failures, particularly during the early days of the war. Its Merlin engine, a powerful force that could propel the Spitfire to over 360 miles per hour, was a masterpiece in itself but required constant maintenance. Every component, from the carburetor to the cooling system, demanded careful attention to ensure the fighter could withstand the brutal demands of aerial combat. The Spitfire's pilots were often referred to as fighter jockeys, a mix of natural skill and raw courage. But even the best pilots could do little when faced with a machine that was constantly on the edge of failure. The high-stress nature of combat meant that aircraft were pushed to their limits, and mechanical issues often led to catastrophic results. This was the reality that RAF ground crews faced every day. They worked tirelessly, often under the cover of darkness, to repair and maintain the fleet. These men, many of them unsung heroes, were the ones responsible for ensuring the Spitfire could stay in the air, ready to face the Luftwaffe at any given moment. Yet, for all their efforts, the engineers and mechanics were always looking for ways to improve the aircraft's performance, no matter how small the innovation might seem. This brings us to the metal washer. At first glance, it was an insignificant part, a small piece of metal no larger than a coin. But in the hands of the RAF's engineers, it would make all the difference. The washer was used to modify a critical component of the Spitfire's engine mount. It wasn't a glamorous innovation, but it was a simple solution to a serious problem: vibration. As the Spitfire's Merlin engine roared to life, the intense vibrations could cause the engine to shift slightly, leading to a misalignment that would affect the aircraft's stability. The solution was simple: the addition of a washer to keep everything securely in place. The result was an improvement in the Spitfire's handling and performance, a small modification that ensured the aircraft could maintain its edge in dogfights against the Luftwaffe. This innovation, though overlooked by many, would become a game-changer in the relentless air battles over Britain. But the mechanic who introduced it, a humble RAF technician, wasn't seeking fame. He was just trying to solve a problem that, if left unaddressed, could cost lives. The metal washer was the brainchild of a quiet RAF mechanic, someone whose name would never make headlines. In the chaos of war, mechanics like him were the unseen lifeblood of the RAF, working in the shadows to ensure that the powerful machines of war could continue their fight. His task was simple: to find ways to make the Spitfire perform better, to keep the planes flying longer, to help the pilots survive. Every day, he worked alongside his team, tightening bolts, checking engines, replacing parts. The pressure was immense. With every passing hour, the threat of a Luftwaffe bombing raid grew closer, and every aircraft needed to be ready to take off at a moment's notice. There was no room for error. It was during one of these long nights, beneath the glow of dim hangar lights, that he noticed something subtle: a slight shift in the engine mounting, a small misalignment that seemed to exacerbate the vibrations from the Merlin engine. It was a small issue, but in the life-or-death world of aerial combat, even the slightest malfunction could lead to disaster. He considered various solutions, but none seemed to work, until he realized the simple answer: a metal washer. The washer's purpose was not to increase speed or agility, but to stabilize the aircraft, ensuring the engine's mount remained secure. It was an unremarkable fix, but it allowed the Spitfire to handle its incredible power without being compromised by unwanted vibrations. The mechanic's small contribution would go unnoticed by many, but its effect would be felt in the skies. In the harsh, competitive world of wartime engineering, these quiet heroes were making a difference in ways that weren't always seen, but were always felt. As the Battle of Britain raged on, the RAF's strategy was simple: gain air superiority and prevent the Luftwaffe from bombing Britain into submission. The RAF pilots, outnumbered and under pressure, relied on their Spitfires to provide the edge needed to face the Luftwaffe's might. Dogfighting, the deadly dance between pilots in the skies, was the primary form of combat. The Spitfire, with its legendary agility, was the perfect instrument for this. But agility was only part of the equation. Reliability and stability under pressure were just as important. It wasn't enough to simply outmaneuver the enemy. The Spitfire had to stay in the fight long enough to defeat them. The metal washer, though simple, was the catalyst that allowed the Spitfire to perform in ways that surprised the Luftwaffe. The addition of the washer improved engine stability, meaning that Spitfire pilots could maintain higher speeds for longer periods without fear of mechanical failure. It wasn't just about turning faster or diving deeper. It was about having confidence that the aircraft would hold together during those critical moments when the stakes were highest. As the Luftwaffe pilots, accustomed to their own aircraft's power and reliability, came into contact with these Spitfires, they were caught off guard. The British fighters could outmaneuver the Germans, staying in the fight longer and, more importantly, surviving longer. It was not just the skill of the RAF pilots that turned the tide, but the performance of the Spitfires themselves. And while the metal washer seemed insignificant in comparison to the dogfights and bombing raids, it was a small but vital piece of the puzzle that allowed the RAF to gain the upper hand in these crucial aerial engagements. While the Spitfire's elliptical wings and powerful engine were well known, it was the smaller, less glamorous innovations that often made the difference between life and death. The metal washer was just one example. There were other modifications, tweaks, and adjustments made throughout the war that improved the Spitfire's combat effectiveness, all of which came from the minds of engineers and mechanics working tirelessly behind the scenes. One of the most significant technological improvements during the Battle of Britain came in the form of a modification to the Spitfire's weapons system. Initially, the Spitfire was equipped with 8.303 Browning machine guns, powerful enough to do considerable damage, but difficult to aim and fire in the heat of battle. Engineers quickly realized that improving the accuracy of these guns was essential if the Spitfire was to be truly effective against the well-coordinated Luftwaffe. With the introduction of a new interrupter gear, the Spitfire's guns were synchronized to fire only when the propeller blades weren't in the way. This innovation greatly increased the effectiveness of the aircraft's offensive capabilities, allowing pilots to concentrate their fire and increase their chances of hitting enemy aircraft. These advancements, no matter how small, were crucial in turning the tide of battle. The seemingly insignificant metal washer that stabilized the Spitfire's engine mount was just one of many small yet crucial innovations that allowed the RAF to punch above its weight against the formidable Luftwaffe. The success of the RAF during the Battle of Britain was not just a product of individual heroism or technological innovation. It was the result of careful strategic planning and leadership. At the helm of this effort was Air Chief Marshal Hugh Dowding, a man whose calm, methodical approach to warfare would prove pivotal in the defense of Britain. Dowding's leadership was often criticized for being cautious, but in the high-stakes world of air combat, caution was often the key to survival. Dowding understood that to win the Battle of Britain, the RAF needed to make every Spitfire count. The importance of maintaining an aircraft's operational readiness was paramount. The Spitfires had to stay in the air, and that meant constant maintenance, minor repairs, and the small innovations that kept them flying. This focus on keeping planes in peak condition was critical, as any loss of an aircraft could mean the difference between victory and defeat. Dowding's leadership ensured that the RAF never fell short of the resources and the ingenuity needed to keep their planes in the fight. He also understood the importance of training and morale. Unlike the Luftwaffe, which relied heavily on experienced pilots, Dowding placed his faith in the RAF's training programs. In a conflict where the life expectancy of a fighter pilot was measured in weeks, keeping new recruits well prepared and mentally resilient was essential. Dowding's strategic vision not only involved tactics on the battlefield but also the holistic approach of maintaining a fighting force that could adapt, survive, and endure. However, Dowding was also a man under immense pressure. His command faced constant demands for more pilots, more aircraft, and more resources, all while under the relentless attack of the Luftwaffe. Yet, despite the odds, Dowding's leadership was one of the most decisive factors in the RAF's ability to withstand the German onslaught. It was his calm, decisive actions, from organizing effective radar defense systems to making critical operational choices, that kept the RAF in the fight, allowing them to maximize the impact of every small innovation, like the metal washer, that came their way. For the Luftwaffe, the Battle of Britain was a campaign they believed would be won by sheer numbers. Hermann Göring, the head of the Luftwaffe, was confident that his pilots could easily crush the RAF and achieve air superiority over Britain. At the outset, the Luftwaffe had over 1,900 aircraft, including bombers, fighters, and reconnaissance planes. The Germans believed that once the RAF was destroyed, the way would be clear for a full-scale invasion of Britain, Operation Sea Lion. But the Luftwaffe had underestimated the resilience of both the RAF and the British people. While the Germans had superior numbers, their pilots were often more inexperienced and less well-trained than their RAF counterparts. Moreover, the Luftwaffe was not prepared for the RAF's use of radar systems, which allowed British pilots to engage the enemy with greater precision and coordination. The Germans relied on traditional methods of visual detection, which left them vulnerable to sudden, well-coordinated British counterattacks. The Luftwaffe also faced tactical challenges that their leadership failed to fully appreciate. German bombers, such as the Heinkel He-111 and Dornier Do-17, lacked the necessary speed and agility to match the Spitfire in a dogfight. As a result, Luftwaffe bombers were often escorted by their own fighters, like the Bf-109, but these fighters were limited by their fuel range and struggled to stay in the air long enough to provide effective cover for the bombers. The Luftwaffe's overconfidence would ultimately be their downfall. They assumed that the RAF's numerical inferiority would make them an easy target. What they didn't count on was the innovative spirit of the RAF mechanics, the resilience of the British pilots, and the relentless will of a nation determined to survive. The turning point came as RAF pilots, flying their Spitfires and Hurricanes, outmaneuvered and outlasted the Luftwaffe in the skies. The Spitfire's small but vital innovations, like the stabilizing effect of the metal washer, gave the British pilots the edge they needed. In a war where every small advantage counted, the Spitfire's ability to maintain its performance under the extreme stress of aerial combat was crucial. The Luftwaffe, facing a tenacious enemy and a series of unexpected setbacks, began to question their superiority. They were outnumbered in the skies, but the RAF's small tactical advantages, including innovations like the metal washer, were slowly turning the tide. On the morning of August 12, 1940, the Battle of Britain reached a turning point. The Luftwaffe launched its largest assault yet, aiming to destroy RAF Fighter Command's bases and cripple its ability to defend Britain. The Germans had set their sights on the heart of RAF operations, the airfields and radar stations that allowed the British to coordinate their defenses. But what they didn't expect was the incredible resilience of the RAF pilots and the power of their machines. The skies above southern England were soon filled with the sound of roaring engines, as more than 1,000 German aircraft made their way across the English Channel. In response, 600 RAF fighters, including the Spitfire and Hawker Hurricane, scrambled into the air. Among these were the pilots of No. 19 Squadron, who were preparing for one of the most intense engagements of their careers. As the Luftwaffe bombers approached their targets, they were intercepted by a wall of Spitfires. The iconic roar of the Merlin engines filled the skies as the British fighters engaged the enemy in a deadly dance of speed and precision. The Spitfire's agility, combined with its enhanced stability from minor adjustments like the metal washer, allowed pilots to outmaneuver their German counterparts. One particular squadron, led by squadron leader Tommy Cummings, found themselves in the thick of the battle. As the squadron climbed into the clear blue skies, they were greeted by the sight of hundreds of German aircraft bearing down on them. The German pilots, confident in their superiority, didn't immediately notice the advantage the RAF fighters held. The Spitfire's small but critical design modifications, like the washer, kept the aircraft stable, even in the most chaotic of dogfights. Within minutes, the RAF pilots engaged the Luftwaffe with unmatched ferocity. The Spitfires twisted and turned, diving in on the enemy with surgical precision, their pilots exploiting every weakness in the German formations. For the Luftwaffe, it was a rude awakening. Their bombers, slow and vulnerable, were torn apart by the agile British fighters. The small metal washer, which seemed like an afterthought to most, was the reason the Spitfires held together under the strain of combat. The engine mount stayed stable, and the aircraft could perform longer and more aggressively than they ever had before. This edge made the difference between life and death for many pilots. As the battle raged on, RAF Fighter Command's radar systems helped direct the Spitfires to intercept German aircraft before they even reached their targets. The Germans, with their outdated detection systems, were caught off guard and forced to adjust their tactics. For the first time, the Luftwaffe was the one on the defensive. The Luftwaffe, realizing that their initial assault had failed, began to shift tactics. They focused more heavily on bombing civilian targets and attempting to break the morale of the British people. But RAF Fighter Command, under the leadership of Hugh Dowding, was already shifting its approach. The RAF's aircraft were modified on the fly, with mechanics making small adjustments, such as the metal washer, to improve reliability and performance. As each day passed, the British pilots began to feel more confident in their aircraft and their ability to counter the German threat. In one of the most pivotal moments of the battle, RAF pilots of 66th Squadron, led by squadron leader Johnny Johnson, took on a wave of Luftwaffe bombers escorted by Bf 109 fighters. Despite being outnumbered, the British pilots fought with a tenacity that caught the Germans off guard. The Spitfires, their engines roaring and wings slicing through the air, darted in and out of enemy formations, their enhanced stability allowing the pilots to maintain precision fire even at high speeds. The Bf 109s, fast and powerful though they were, could not match the Spitfire's agility. The metal washer, while simple, had played its part in allowing the Spitfires to remain stable during rapid maneuvers, something that the Luftwaffe pilots could not replicate. As the battle raged on, more and more Luftwaffe planes fell from the skies. The RAF's small but decisive technological advantages had tilted the balance in their favor. By the end of August, the Luftwaffe had lost hundreds of aircraft. The RAF, although still outnumbered, had managed to fight the Germans to a standstill. What had started as a desperate struggle for survival had turned into a fierce resistance, one that would break the Luftwaffe's momentum and shift the tide of the war. The key to this success was not just the courage of the pilots, but also the technological innovations, no matter how small, that had given them the edge. The metal washer, like so many other small adjustments, had kept the Spitfires flying when they might otherwise have failed. The German High Command, stunned by the failure to break the RAF, began to question their assumptions. Their inability to crush the British resistance in the air had led to a rethinking of the entire strategy. The invasion of Britain, which had seemed inevitable just weeks earlier, was now indefinitely postponed. The Battle of Britain was a victory, but it was a victory made possible by the smallest of innovations, the smallest of adjustments. The metal washer, a simple and overlooked piece of machinery, had played its part in turning the tide of the war. By the first week of September 1940, the Battle of Britain had reached its most intense phase. The Luftwaffe, unable to achieve the air superiority it had anticipated, suffered devastating losses. Their repeated attempts to break the RAF's defenses had failed. The High Command in Berlin, increasingly frustrated by the resistance, began to realize that the plan for Operation Sea Lion, the invasion of Britain, was no longer feasible. The once confident Luftwaffe was now facing its first major defeat in the war, and its pilots were beginning to question their superiority. The statistics were grim for the Germans. Over the course of the battle, they had lost more than 1,700 aircraft, bombers, fighters, and reconnaissance planes in exchange for approximately 500 British aircraft. But the real victory for the RAF was not just the relatively low losses, but the ability to maintain air superiority, despite being outnumbered and often outgunned. The Luftwaffe had failed to break fighter command, and with each day that passed, the morale of the RAF grew stronger. The role of the Spitfire in this success was undeniable. The aircraft, which had been in constant modification since the start of the war, had reached its peak performance during the Battle of Britain. The enhancements, such as the small but crucial metal washer, had helped to stabilize the aircraft and keep it in the fight longer. This small innovation had allowed the Spitfires to engage the Luftwaffe with greater precision and endurance. In the wake of the battle, RAF pilots were heralded as heroes. Squadron leaders like Douglas Bader and Johnny Johnson became household names, celebrated not just for their skill in combat, but for their indomitable spirit in the face of overwhelming odds. Yet, while the pilots received much of the recognition, the mechanics and engineers behind the scenes knew the truth. The victory was as much a result of the innovation in the ground crews as it was in the skies. The small tweaks and adjustments, from engine repairs to the addition of washers, like the one that had stabilized the Spitfire's engine mounts, had made all the difference. The Luftwaffe, meanwhile, was forced to reconsider its strategy. Göring's boastful predictions of crushing the RAF had been shattered. The failure to gain control of the skies over Britain meant that the Germans would have to shift their focus to other fronts. The loss of so many experienced pilots, coupled with the inability to break the RAF's defenses, severely weakened the Luftwaffe's overall effectiveness. Germany's chances of invading Britain diminished by the day. The Battle of Britain, though not decisive in a traditional sense, marked the first major turning point in the war. It was the first time that Nazi Germany had suffered a strategic defeat. The psychological impact was immense. Not only had the British proven that they could resist, but they had also shown that innovation, persistence, and resolve could overcome seemingly insurmountable odds. For Britain, this victory provided a crucial psychological boost. It proved that the Luftwaffe could be beaten, that the Germans were not invincible. The Spitfire's role in this victory would go down in history, not just as a symbol of British engineering, but as a testament to the power of small innovations in the heat of battle. The metal washer, like so many other unnoticed improvements, had played its part in one of the most important victories of the Second World War. The immediate outcome of the Battle of Britain was clear. The Luftwaffe had failed to achieve its objective of air superiority, and the invasion of Britain was postponed indefinitely. The battle had cost Germany dearly, not just in aircraft and pilots, but in morale and strategic positioning. The Luftwaffe's defeat would have long-lasting consequences, reshaping the course of the war in Europe. For Britain, the victory in the Battle of Britain was nothing short of miraculous. Against overwhelming odds, the RAF had held its ground, proving that a smaller, well-coordinated force could withstand the might of Nazi Germany. The British people, who had endured months of bombing raids, were lifted by the news of the RAF's success. The few, as Winston Churchill would famously call them, had held the line and ensured that Britain would remain free to continue the fight against Hitler. The battle also had a profound effect on the strategic direction of the war. With the RAF's survival ensured, Britain was able to focus its efforts on other crucial fronts. The Battle of the Atlantic, the protection of convoys, and preparations for the eventual Allied invasion of Europe were all made possible by the fact that Britain could maintain its air superiority. Had the Luftwaffe succeeded in breaking fighter command, the outcome of these campaigns could have been drastically different. But the RAF's victory was not simply a matter of luck or skill. It was a culmination of countless small innovations, from radar systems to mechanical fixes, from tactical adjustments to the steady, dependable performance of the Spitfire. The metal washer, a seemingly insignificant innovation, had helped keep these machines in the air. In the chaos of war, it was often these quiet, unnoticed changes that made the greatest difference. The relentless work of RAF engineers, mechanics, and ground crews ensured that the Spitfire remained a symbol of British defiance, capable of meeting the Luftwaffe head-on. The strategic implications were immense. The Luftwaffe's defeat in the Battle of Britain forced Adolf Hitler to rethink his plans for an invasion of Britain. Operation Sea Lion, which had once seemed inevitable, was now a distant dream. Instead of focusing on an invasion, Hitler turned his attention to the east, launching Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union, in June 1941. This shift in focus, although a desperate gamble, would prove to be a crucial turning point in the war, leading to the eventual downfall of Nazi Germany. On a broader scale, the Battle of Britain marked the first major turning point in the war. It demonstrated that Nazi Germany could be resisted. It also showed the world the importance of innovation, resilience, and technological advancements in warfare. The RAF's victory proved that no matter how overwhelming the enemy's superiority seemed, with determination and ingenuity, victory was possible. As the war continued, the lessons learned in the skies over Britain would resonate throughout the conflict. The Spitfire would go on to become one of the most iconic aircraft of the war, serving in various theaters of combat from North Africa to the Pacific. Its design would evolve, but its legacy would remain a testament to the power of small innovations and the spirit of those who fought to defend freedom. The impact on the Spitfire and engineering innovation. The metal washer was just one small part of the Spitfire's evolution. Engineers and ground crews continued to make adjustments and improvements throughout the war, from refining the aircraft's aerodynamics to enhancing its weaponry. But perhaps the most significant lesson from the Battle of Britain was the importance of constant adaptation. In the world of aerial combat, where every second counted and every advantage was crucial, the ability to make quick, effective changes was what set the RAF apart. The engineering success of the Spitfire became a symbol of British resilience. It wasn't just the pilots who were celebrated, it was the entire network of individuals, from the designers to the mechanics, who had contributed to the aircraft's success. The Spitfire's triumph in the skies of Britain was a collective victory, one made possible by the contributions of those who had never fired a shot in anger, but whose work was just as critical to the outcome of the war. The Battle of Britain was not just a military victory. It was a triumph of innovation, perseverance, and the unyielding will to survive. In the heat of combat, where lives were lost in seconds and the skies were filled with the roar of engines and the thunder of gunfire, it was the small, often overlooked innovations that made all the difference. A simple metal washer, added to a Spitfire's engine mount, stabilized the aircraft just enough to give British pilots the edge they needed to outmaneuver their foes. It wasn't the grand gestures of war that changed the course of history. It was the quiet work behind the scenes that ensured victory. In many ways, the Battle of Britain encapsulates the essence of human ingenuity under duress. The RAF was outnumbered and outgunned, yet it found a way to fight back, not just through superior tactics, but through small adjustments that enabled their machines to withstand the brutal demands of aerial combat. For the men on the ground, the engineers, mechanics, and unsung heroes who worked tirelessly to keep the Spitfires flying, it was a reminder that every contribution, no matter how minor it seemed, was part of a greater whole. The defeat of the Luftwaffe was a turning point in the war, but it was also a profound statement about the resilience of the human spirit. The Battle of Britain showed that when faced with overwhelming odds, innovation, courage, and the will to endure can tip the balance. It was a victory forged not just in the skies, but in the workshops, the airfields, and the hearts of those who refused to surrender. Looking back, the significance of the Battle of Britain reaches far beyond the immediate strategic consequences. It reshaped the trajectory of the Second World War, and in many ways, it altered the very nature of warfare. The battle taught the world that even in the darkest hours, when all seemed lost, small acts of brilliance and innovation could lead to monumental change. The Spitfire, the metal washer, the radar systems, all were symbols of this quiet revolution. In the end, it was not the number of planes or the strength of the enemy that determined the outcome, but the determination of those who refused to give in. The RAF, with its Spitfires and its resilience, turned the tide of the war, and in doing so, proved that even the smallest innovations, born of necessity and humble ingenuity, can alter the course of history.